Welcome to Novels and Noise. This is the summary video for A Picture of Dorian Gray. Let's just jump right into this, okay? So there are three main characters throughout the entire book. Dorian Gray, Basil Howard, and Lord Henry Wotton. Dorian Gray is beautiful. That's his whole thing, is he's just gorgeous, and he is a pure soul and a pure aesthetic beauty. And he doesn't do anything. He's an aristocrat. They're all aristocrats in London. And Basil Howard is an artist. He's obsessed with art. He's obsessed with beauty and obsessed with capturing beauty, but not putting himself into paintings. It's kind of a pretentious thing. The whole book is pretty pretentious, but Basil Howard's very pretentious with his art. He's obsessed with making it pure. And Dorian is pure, so he's obsessed with Dorian and painting Dorian. And he's working on his masterpiece when the book starts. Okay, and when the book starts, he's talking with his good friend, Lord Henry Wotton. And Lord Henry Wotton's an interesting character because he's not like a real person. He's a philosophy, okay? And his philosophy is pleasure and youth. He only cares about those two things. He's an aristocrat as well. He's never had to work. He doesn't have to pay his bills, as his rich uncle does that for him. And so, one of his quotes is, the worst sin, or the only unforgivable sin, is boredom. So that's where he comes from. So to him, let's not be bored by seeking pleasure and youth and beauty. Everything's about looking for beauty. And so those are the main characters of the book. They're the only characters in the whole first part of the book. So to start it off, Basil and Henry are sitting in Basil's art studio looking at the beautiful painting of Dorian. Talking about how beautiful it is, and he says, where are you gonna show it? What art gallery does it go to? And he says, I won't put it in an art gallery because it's too real. It has too much of me in it. It's his masterpiece, he thinks. Basil's like, I've never done anything nearly this good. Henry wants to meet Dorian. Basil is like, no, you can't meet him, you'll ruin him, because he's pure and you are not pure. But Henry's insistent, and so they go and meet Dorian, and he's finishing the painting with Dorian sitting on the, it's, all the settings in this book are so, I almost said obscenely beautiful, so intensely beautiful. They're in this big villa, this pavilion with light coming naturally in through a bunch of, sky mirrors, I don't know what you call them, but, surrounded by lilies and poppies and all these different gorgeous flowers. And Lord Henry is speaking to Dorian while Basil's painting him. Basil, who knows? And he's saying, you won't be beautiful forever. And the only way to stay beautiful is to never sin, to never do anything wrong. He says, but you can't do that either, because beauty is only in the things that are wrong. And so he's got this very paradoxical philosophy, and it kind of scares Dorian. And all that Dorian knows is, it's gonna fade. I'm gonna lose it. So he's a little frightened, and then Basil finishes the picture. He goes and he looks at the picture, and he's terrified because he's finally aware, and the picture's beautiful and it's perfect. It's exactly like him, and he's aware of just how beautiful he is. And he's terrified because at the same moment he realizes how beautiful he is, he realizes his own mortality, and he's gonna fade. And he makes this wish, this big dramatic wish. He's like, oh, if only this painting would grow old instead of me, and I could stay beautiful forever. And it's a throwaway line, it seems like, but that's exactly what's going to happen. Basil gives him the portrait. He says, I can't give this to a gallery. This is yours. So Dorian takes the portrait with him. Basil invites him to stay for dinner. Henry invites him to go out to the theater with him. And he chooses to go with Henry, which is sort of symbolic of him not staying in this little bubbled, protected world. Instead, he's saying, no, I'm going to go and experience pleasure. Henry's big line in this that sticks through the rest of the book is he tells Dorian that the soul must be cured with the senses, and the senses must be cured with the soul. So he's saying when your soul aches, when you feel that you've done something wrong, you need to cure that by material and physical pleasure. And when physically something's wrong, you can cure it with doing good things. And it seems true, but like a lot of what Henry Wotton says, when you think about it, it's kind of just fanciful, little nice words. The last thing that happens in the first part of the book is Henry goes to his uncle, who supports him And he says, what's up with this Dorian Gray guy? And Dorian's like, oh, Dorian Gray. His parents, grandfather's stupid rich. His mom married a common man, just like a peasant. The grandfather had the peasant killed, and the mom died after he was born. So he never had any parents. That's sort of just his backstory. He grew up with, I think, like a French and a German homeschool nurse, maids, did everything for him, that taught him all these different languages, made him very cultured, but he never experienced the world. He never was influenced really by anyone but formal education. So the idea is that's where his purity is in his youth. Let's move on to part 2. All right, part 2, the corruption of Dorian Gray. That's what I called it. I wonder what happens. A couple characters you need to know. One is Sybil Vane. She's an actress. She's a tremendous actress, and she works at this little terrible studio. Her brother James Vane, who's I think 16 years old, she's only 17, and he's going to go off to be a sailor, like in this section. I was going to say tomorrow, but you have no reference for that. And then there's a bunch of dinner party guests. They go to dinner parties again and again, and there's a ton of them. You don't need to know who any of the people are. They're all aristocrats. They're all very, very pompous and high-nosed. So they go to this dinner party, Dorian and Henry together. Basil's not there. And Henry's just spitting out his philosophy. And it's all pleasure. It's all youth. It's all provocative. He tells this woman, she asks, oh, how do you get your youth back? And he's like, by committing the same mistakes that you did in your youth. He's like, did you ever make any mistakes? Did you ever do anything stupid? She's like, oh, well, of course I did. And he's like, well, just do them again. That's how you reclaim your youth. Which is kind of a stupid thing to say. Everyone could tell that in the room, except for Dorian, who's like really interested in everything. Dorian's just so lasered in on the guy. He's so obsessed with he's just sticking to every word he says. And everyone knows, everyone in the whole place is like, oh, that's wicked, that's awful. Don't say that, Henry. You're just being provocative. You don't mean it. You don't really think it. And Henry doesn't really think it. He's just being provocative. But Dorian doesn't get that. So then they go off together, enjoy the night at the club, and the next chapter, Dorian's at his house and he meets his wife, and Henry and his wife has a terrible relationship. And Henry, by the way, just says the worst things about marriage. He says the worst things, not specifically about his own wife, but just the idea of commitment and love. He thinks it's foolish, and he says awful things about women in general. He's a bit of a misogynist. Not a bit. He's quite a misogynist. And so he meets his wife, and he kind of realizes, Dorian doesn't realize, but the reader realizes that they have a terrible relationship and they never see each other, and that's because of Henry's philosophy, but Dorian doesn't even see it. Dorian's still interested in Henry and what he has to say. He tells Henry that he's fallen in love with an actress, that he goes to see her every night. Her name's Sybil Vane, and she's wonderful. And he has to come see her too, and Henry makes fun of him, but he's like, no, come see her and you'll know that she's great, and that I should marry her. And he's like, oh, don't marry her. And he's like, oh yeah, you're right, I'll never get married. And then the next day he's engaged to be married. So Dorian's sort of in this place right now where he's in between buying everything Harry says and still being youthful and innocent and wanting to be married and to be in love and to feel all of the feelings. So they all, Basil, Henry, and Dorian all go to see her, and she's like awful. She performs terribly. And Basil and Henry leave in the first act. I should mention, by the way, sometimes I'm going to say Harry, sometimes I'll say Henry, same person. But they leave in the first act, and Dorian goes, he's furious, right? He goes and talks to her and says, maybe she's sick, maybe something was wrong. And she goes, I'm not sick, nothing's wrong. I just see reality so much for what it is. I used to be so focused on the stage. I thought the actor who played Romeo was really Romeo, and I thought the set was really this, like where I was, and I was so immersed because I didn't have any experience of the real world. But I love you so much. I love you so much that now I see that Romeo is just a fat man. Now I see that the stage is just a stage, and she thinks that's very romantic, and that they'll go away together. He's engaged to her, that he loves her, and he's furious, and he says, you've made me not love you. You've ruined this. I'll never see you again. You've ruined yourself. I loved you because you were a great actress, and now that you're not a great actress, you're nothing to me. Which is just crushes her, of course. It's awful. But it's all part of what Henry's been teaching him, which is when beauty fades, you abandon it. Because what use is it? And so he leaves, and he's furious about it all night, and he gets home, and he finally, okay, never mind. And he goes and he sees the picture of himself at home, and it's changed. It's a little twisted. He looks a little cruel. He looks a little wicked, and he's kind of puzzled by it at first until he realizes that the picture is that what he wished for exactly happened. Instead of him aging, instead of him becoming wicked looking and twisted, the picture is becoming twisted, and he panics and worries, and he decides, well, I'll go back tomorrow and I'll make everything better, because now I realize what I did was cruel, but I can make it better, and maybe the picture will go back and my soul will return to the beauty that it was. So he's getting ready to do that, and Henry comes over, and Henry says, you haven't heard? Sybil committed suicide last night. She poisoned herself, and they're not under suspicion because they just call you Prince Charming down there. No one even knows your name. She was the only one who knew your name, so you're not connected to the crime at all, but she's dead. And of course, that Dorian wants to be crushed. He wants to be mortified, and for moments he is, but he can't feel it as much as he says he wants to. And this is because he really stopped caring when she stopped being beautiful. He's really starting to buy into this philosophy of pleasure. So he's like, I'm gonna go buy poppies. I'm gonna mourn for a couple of days. And Henry's like, don't mourn. Like, move on. It's over. I'm meeting some girls tonight at the opera. They'll like you. You should come with me to the opera tonight. This is the day after she commits suicide. He just found out he committed suicide. She committed suicide. And he's like, okay, I'll go to the opera with you. And he goes to the opera that night and flirts with these girls and just moves on completely. Basil comes and sees him the next day and is just horrified at the fact that he did this. And Dorian's like annoyed that Basil wants to mourn her and sees it as tragic. Dorian's like, get over it, man. And Dorian talks about becoming a spectator of his own life, how he could look at the situation and see it as beautiful because she was an actress and she played her greatest part in her suicide. And he was looking at it like he wasn't a part of it, like it wasn't a thing that really happened. And that's just, that's delusional, of course. And Basil knows this, but Dorian doesn't get it. And so Basil leaves and he's very sad. And Dorian goes, looks at the painting, decides, I'm going to let this take on everything. I'm going to experience every pleasure. I'm going to find every beauty, even if it's wicked, even if it's evil, even if it's just, unbearable to know about myself. He goes, I'm going to go do that because this picture will take it for me, and I can ignore this picture. So he does. He laughs at it, right? One of the things he does is as he starts doing things and the picture gets uglier and uglier, he goes in and he laughs at it mockingly. And then another night he'll go in and he'll cry. So he's turned over himself to this, but he hasn't completely. He still regrets it. It's kind of a nice dynamic. Not a nice dynamic, it's an awful dynamic, but it's an interesting one. And that's the end of what I'd put as part 2, so let's move to part 3. Part 3 is called The True Dorian Gray. That's what I'm calling it. There's a couple new characters introduced, but we'll get to them as we go along. So there's a time jump, right? So now it's been 18 years and Dorian looks exactly the same. Everyone else has aged, of course. And there's this huge long chapter that talks about everything that Dorian immerses himself in. And it's really implied that he does some terrible things, immerses himself in terrible things. And there's all these rumors going about town. He gets really famous. He's like the cultural happening of London. He throws all these parties, like once a week he throws a party. He goes to parties pretty much every other night of the week where he's not, off indulging in some other pleasure. It's the most boring chapter in the whole book. It's like, he gets really into jewelry. And then it talks about jewelry for like 4 paragraphs. It's like he gets really into music and it talks about music for 4 paragraphs. And then he gets really into fabrics and textures and then talks about that for like 4 paragraphs. But it tells us all the good things he gets into and it only implies the bad things. But the bad things are heavily implied. The painting's ugly. The painting's awful. And he's going up, as often as he can to see it. He gets paranoid. He'll be out with some friends, and then he'll just be struck by fear and have to run back and check on it and make sure that it hasn't been stolen or anything. He's got it locked up, by the way. He locks it up in his old schoolroom, which represents if you remember, his youth represented his purity. And that schoolroom is sort of that room where he never used to go in after he was done being a boy, and it's where he locks away his wretched soul, is in the purity of his root. And so it sort of ruined his purity. It's a very, very heavy-handed metaphor for what corruption does, which is ruin purity and goodness. So he runs into Basil near his home, and he's kind of frightened by him. Basil's leaving his home, and he's going back home, and just seeing the painter kind of gives him anxiety. And Basil's like, "Oh, Dorian, I was looking for you. I was just at your house. I'm going to Paris. I'm doing like an art show in Paris. It's going to be 6 months, and I really needed to talk to you before I left." So Dorian's like, "Okay, come inside. Let's talk." And Basil's like, "Look, there's horrible rumors about you. You don't even understand how bad the rumors are. I need to ask you, like, is this real?" And Dorian just gets defensive. He deflects. He gives a bunch of aphorisms, just these empty one-liners from Lord Henry to just keep deflecting, but he never gives a straight answer to whether or not he's done all these things. And Basil's concerned and worried and hurt, and he talks about the painting, and then he says, Basil goes, "I should have to see your soul to know you." And Dorian's terrified because he thinks, "See my soul?" Like, he thinks he knows about it, and he's scared, and then he's like, "But only God can see the soul." And then Dorian gets arrogant and full of himself immediately, and he laughs. I'm not going to do the laugh, but he laughs maniacally, and he's like, "I'll show you my soul. Like, God isn't the only one who can see a soul." And so he's filled with this sense of poetry in this moment, right? He's going to go show the maker of his own soul. He's going to expose it to him. And so he's kind of just gleeful and crazy, and he's come upstairs. Like, "Let me show you." He says, "I have a notebook where I take a journal of everything I do every day, and I'll show it to you." And he means the painting, of course. So he takes him up there, and Basil won't pull it off. He keeps the painting covered. And he's like, "I don't want to pull off the cover." So Dorian pulls it off, and Basil is terrified. He looks at it, and he stumbles backward because it's just so ugly. It's clearly Dorian, but it's disgusting and wretched and just evil. And he doesn't recognize it as his own work. And he starts looking at the brush strokes, and he's like, "That looks like my work." And then he notices his name is signed in the corner, and he starts to realize what's going on. He's in denial, really. And Dorian's like, "Remember the wish I made? That this would take on all my age and wickedness?" And it's like, "Yeah." So he's scared, and he begs Dorian. It's like, "Pray. Ask for forgiveness, man. Like, here, I need to ask for forgiveness. Do it with me." And Dorian, who just before this was like watching him maniacally, like he pulls out a flower, and then he's talking and explaining to him, and he crushes the flower. It's very, very villainous and very, very theatrical, which is exactly how Dorian's taking in the moment. But he says, "Pray with me, like, ask for forgiveness. Like, you need to take forgiveness." And Dorian, says, "It's too late for that," kind of a little tearfully. And he says, "No, it's not too late. Do it with me." And he says, "Those words mean nothing to me now." He's completely like Lord Henry. He's cynical and jaded, and he believes he's too far gone to ever. His soul's right in front of him. It's easy to believe that you'd be too far gone when you can see the wretchedness of everything you did, and if you've really done some terrible things, that would be hard to believe. Then Basil turns to him, and he says, "Don't you see that accursed thing leering at us?" And Dorian looks at the portrait, and he becomes more furious than ever. And it's almost like the portrait is suggesting to him to attack Basil, to get revenge on Basil for creating this conundrum. And he feels defensive, right? Because he's just shown his friend his soul, knowing that his friend would be horrified, but then his friend is actually horrified. The creator is actually horrified, and it's like not the reaction he thought. He thinks, this will be fun to watch, and then he realizes it hurts because that painting is him. and he's scared of him. So his eyes just go red, basically. His vision goes red, and he grabs a knife that's on the table, which just happened to be there, and he stabs Basil in the neck over and over violently and slams his head on the floor, and really violently murders the guy. And even that he looks back on immediately as poetic, as as him killing his creator almost. It's a little bit like Nietzsche's proclamation of God is dead, man has killed him. That's sort of I think what Oscar Wilde's getting at here. And Dorian handles it like a pro. He's like, oh, where are Basil's things? And he goes in between moments of feeling gleeful and feeling like terrified, but he handles it like a pro. He finds his suitcases, gets them destroyed, and he builds an alibi for himself. He goes outside and knocks on the door and makes his servant answer the door and say, oh, I left my key somewhere else. I was just out until 3 a.m. I wasn't here. Builds an alibi, gets rid of all the evidence, and then he summons his friend, or not really his friend, this guy, Alan Campbell, who's a scientist. He comes over, and Alan Campbell comes over, and he's furious. That's the wrong word. He clearly has a history with Dorian, and he clearly hates Dorian. Dorian has done something to this guy to make him just not want to be in the same room as him. He says, I promise I never come here again. I promise I never see you again. What do you want? And he says, I've got a body upstairs, and I need you to get rid of it for me. And the guy's like, never. I would never do anything to help you. That's horrible. I wouldn't be involved in this. And Dorian just slides a note across the table to him. The guy reads it, and the guy he goes white. So Dorian's blackmailing him with something. And we never really know what Dorian blackmails him with, which I think is meant to let you assume the worst and have that be the case. We couldn't know all the horrible things Dorian has done, but whatever you think maybe Dorian did to this guy, I think we don't know, because he's probably done that. That's probably something he's done. There's no depth to what he might have blackmailed this guy with, is the suggestion. So the guy does it. He goes up, Dorian takes him upstairs, and Dorian goes to open the door, and he's like, I can't go in. I couldn't bear to possibly go in. And it's like, dude, you murdered the guy. But he's this romantic, right? And it's no longer beautiful. The moment was beautiful, but it's not beautiful now. Because it's so not beautiful in that room, I couldn't possibly go in. It'd be so awful to go in and see my friend on the floor dead. And by the way, the description of the body as soon as he kills it isn't like Basil, like the dead body of Basil. He just calls it the thing, right? The thing that was hunched over in the chair, dripping with blood. So he's so delusioned. I couldn't see the body. I couldn't possibly. So the guy goes in. Well, actually, he doesn't want to go in, and then he realizes that the painting's uncovered, which forces him to go in. To protect his own secret, he's willing to do anything, right? He wasn't willing to go in the room at all. He couldn't bear it until he realized he needed to hide himself, to hide his darkness, and so he does, and he hides it. And Alan goes in, and he destroys the body. Alan leaves, and we later learn, it happens later in the book, but I'll just say it now. Alan goes on to kill himself. Whatever Dorian blackmailed him with, and the act of destroying that body for Dorian was just too much for the guy, and he killed himself, and that's another death. It's on Dorian's hands, but that Dorian won't take blame for. The portrait becomes more ugly, and this is a theme. Dorian doesn't take blame for the actress, whatever her name was. I can't ever remember because it's just such an awful name. Sybil, I think. He doesn't take blame for. He's clearly the reason she died, but he doesn't take blame. She killed herself. What did I have to do with that? What did Dorian Gray have to do with that? And then Alan Campbell kills himself. What do I have to do with that? And even Basil, he's like, Basil killed. He rationalizes his way around it to saying, I had no choice but to kill Basil. So it's Basil's fault. It's not my fault. But the picture gets uglier and uglier, and that's undeniable. That is the end of part 3. Let's move on to part 4. All right, part 4, justice. Right? That's what I called this one. So Dorian can't get over Basil, and I should mention this is where I wish the book ended. This is the perfect ending point for the book, but it goes on, so let's go Dorian can't get over him. He's torn up about it. It's all he thinks about, and so he decides he's gonna do what he's done a lot before and what Henry taught him to do, which was to cure the soul with the senses. And he hires his taxi cab and he has him drive him to an opium den that he's clearly fairly familiar with. He goes and does like the secret knock, and they open it up, and it's just this, he's this beautiful, beautiful man still, in elegant garb, and he walks into just the most awful opium den, and everyone knows him. He's like Norm from Cheers. And he walks in, and there's a guy in the corner who's like freaking out. He's like, there's ants all over me, and he's swiping his arm, and there's some, whatever, essentially crack whores laughing at him. And he goes to the back room, and he runs into this guy that he knows. His name's Adrian. And he's like, oh, you're here? And he decides, Adrian kind of confesses to him, like, yeah, no, I've been here. This is all I do now. And it's revealed that, Dorian ruined this guy's life. He got him hooked on this stuff. And now he is. And it's another thing that Dorian doesn't blame himself for, but it's obviously Dorian's fault. And so Dorian's like, all right, come have a drink with me at the bar, and they talk for a little bit. Some girl calls him Prince Charming, which is what the actress used to call him. Sybil. Awful name. And he's like, I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to go to the other crack house, or the other opium den. And the implication of that's actually kind of ugly. It means that he probably hired her as a prostitute and made her call him Prince Charming in a fantasy of his first love that he killed. So it's just kind of another implication of just awful wickedness. Using that purity to get a kind of twisted joy. It's disgusting. It really is. And throw that over there. And so he leaves, and he's followed by the man who is, freaking out over the ants, and he grabs him by the back of the neck, shoves him against the wall, and puts a pistol in his head. And it's revealed that it's James Vane, Sybil's brother, who was the sailor who had left. He was, back in town briefly, and he heard Prince Charming, and he never knew Dorian's name because he wanted to track him down and kill him. And he never knew his name, so he never could, but he heard Prince Charming, and he says, it must be you, I'm going to kill you. And Dorian, worried, he's like, wait, how long ago was it? He was like, it was 18 years ago. And he's like, look, shine the light on my face. Look, I'm only like 20 years old. It couldn't have been me. I would have been 2 when this guy killed your sister. And he's like, okay. So he weasels out of it and he escapes. And then the girl who called him Prince Charming comes over, and she's like, no, that was him. He corrupted me. He turned me into this 18 years ago. So Dorian's been doing this for 18 years, and she tells it to James, and James, of course, is like, oh, well, now I know who he is. Or he can find out who he is, and he's gonna go track him down. So jump cut, now we're at Dorian's summer home, and he's having a big, week-long vacation getaway. Very elegant, there's hunting grounds that he doesn't hunt on because he's far too prim for that. There's gardens and loads of servants. It's the epitome of, aristocratic posh. And he's there with his friends, Henry and Henry's sister. Henry's sister is flirting with him a ton. Dorian's used to it. He walks out into the garden while they're all talking, and he sees James Van looking at him through the window, and he faints out of fear. And he wakes back up, and James is gone, but he's afraid. And then there's this group that goes on a hunt. And what they're doing is they're quail hunting, and they're all just lined up in a line, shooting up at all these quail or some other bird. I don't think it really specifies. And there's a rabbit that runs across, and a guy goes to shoot the rabbit, and Dorian's like, no, don't shoot the rabbit. And he shoots it, and it's James Vane is in the bushes behind the rabbit, and he shoots him in the chest and kills him, and then James is dead. Why? I don't know. But James is dead, and Dorian's happy because he got off scot-free. Which, he's like Daffy Duck, and he's hunting someone and doesn't even know he's hunting him, and then he just dies without the person having to do anything. It's absurd. And he's speaking with Henry, and he says he's going to be good. James reminded him of his first sin, and he's like, well, no, I'm going to make it all up. Because I met a girl just like I met Sybil, and I fell in love with her. And I'm going to let her go. I'm not going to corrupt her. I'm going to let her go with my act of good, and I'm going to start on being a better person. and he's really like proud of this. So he goes home to where the painting is, and he looks at the painting, and it's uglier than ever. It's clearly taken on the death of James, which he doesn't take on as his own responsibility, and the girl, letting her go, he realized was just an act of vanity. That he wasn't really doing a good thing, because he was only doing it to be more beautiful. So he's angry at his conscience. He resolves to destroy the painting. His conscience, he really resolves to destroy. He takes the same knife that he used to kill Basil, and he plunges it into the painting. And the quote that comes before it is, "As it killed the painter, so it would kill the painter's work, and all that that meant. It would kill the past, and then when that was dead, he would be free." So he goes to destroy the painting in anger. And the next thing that happens is the servants, enter the room to find that there's a beautiful picture of young Dorian Gray that looks just like him, untarnished, and an old man on the floor with a knife in his heart. And the only way they can tell who it is because he's so misshapen. The only way they can tell that it's Dorian is by the rings on his fingers. And that's the end of the story. I really like the ending. There was a lot of things I didn't like about it, and a lot of things I did. And if you're interested in what those maybe are, and some other things, like what was the best word in the book, what haikus would you write about the book, other fun things, come check out my book club. I'll have a link to it right here. We're going to write music for the book another time. It's going to be a good time. Stick around, subscribe to our channel, like our videos, find us on Instagram and Facebook, and I'll see you around.